The great Joe Allen is here. You see his book behind him, Dark Aeon, Transhumanism and the War Against Humanity. Joe, how you doing, sir?
Just fine, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing really good. This special is specifically about Apple Vision Pro, but it's about much more than that. But briefly, give us your take on the Apple Vision Pro.
You know, the most interesting thing about it is the kind of hype around it. It in many ways is more sleek and sophisticated than Meta's technology, if only because of the interface. It looks a lot better. So the question is whether that will be the inflection point that, you know, you'll see widespread adoption of augmented reality, of virtual reality. Meta's metaverse really didn't take off as even I had assumed it would at the time. So, the real danger to all of this is obvious to most people. If you have a technology that allows people to sink into a digital world in a completely immersive way, if you have, what they call the kind of simulation in the brain of the sensory world being replaced by a digital one, then you have a populace that is at the best deluded and at the worst become kind of hosts for an algorithmic parasite. So I don't really think that Apple Vision Pro will be that inflection point of widespread adoption. I think we're probably a year or two away from that at least. But at the very, I do think it's important because it does show the continuation of that quest to, basically immerse humanity in the digital world, that fusion of the physical, digital, and biological identities that our boy Klaus Schwab is always talking about.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you that Apple Vision Pro is really only for the early adapter people, but it's their first foray into it, and it'll only get better and more sleek and cheaper and all this stuff. And it's a great opportunity for us to define our principles on this, so we can take a stand against it if you wish. Now, so I'm grateful for this early warning sign that we can all take. Let me ask you this question. You say it's obvious, right? You're like, oh, the problems are obvious. I don't think they are. I mean, I know maybe to like a more conservative person they are, but to most people they're not. I think most people are like, sure, let's slap this thing on my face. It'll be more convenient and things will be a little easier. And look how neat it is, right? And we'll just like go on with it. So when you talk, so I have like an immediate revulsion to it. Like and we were playing those clips on the side. I don't know if you saw them, like people walking around, like doing this in the air. And I'm like, what in the world is that? But I think most people see that and they're like, oh, I bet that's really cool. So what do you say to the people that don't have that instinctual like disgust of this technology?
I'm still trying to figure that out in many ways. But the argument I usually turn to is to look at the big picture. All sorts of things are great in their immediate experience. Drugs are fantastic when you're on them. Loose sex is awesome until the chickens come home to roost, so to speak. So, when you look at the big picture of all of these technologies, from the most mundane to the most radical, you see a couple of different dynamics at play. The two that I try to focus on the most are that these corporations do not have your best interests at heart. These corporations, by and large, are set up to make money, even if that is to the detriment of their consumers. It shouldn't be that way, of course, and it's not always that way, but it's that way enough that people should view any product with tremendous suspicion, at least skepticism. The other one, when you do look at the big picture, the kind of ideals that these tech companies are driving toward, that includes Apple, although they're much more reticent, but certainly Meta, OpenAI, Musk and all of his projects, Google and all of their projects. The key figures are intent on creating a world in which you have artificial general intelligence, AGI, or as I call it, artificial godlike intelligence. You have a mission on the part of pretty much all of them to find ways for human beings to interface with the supposedly superior being. And, it goes all the way down to, total neurological and even genetic transformation of those humans who do stick around and remain relevant in this revolution. So whether you believe that ideal is achievable or not, it's really important to understand that that is the ideal, that is the worldview, that is the ultimate goal of all of this. And if it turns out to be some sort of half-baked version, some approximation of this ideal future, it's still, for I think most people, nightmarish. To some extent, I think that does shake some people awake. But the reality is that people are going to do what they're going to do, and most people are going to do what is convenient. Most people are going to do what they think is going to give them high social status. Most people are going to do what they think is cool, even boomers.
Yeah, that's true. All right, great points there. Let's focus on the worldview one you talked about, because we need to know who we're following. It's so interesting. People think maybe they're just trying on a product or something, but it's no, you're following a person. You're following people who have a specific worldview, who are selling you this product. That's who we need to be thinking of. So this transhumanism idea, are they trying to replace God? Are they trying to be God? What are the spiritual ramifications of all of this?
I immediately think of Tucker Carlson's recent interview at the World Government Summit. I'm sorry for stammering over that. It used to be the World Government Summit for 7 years. Now they've changed it to World Governments Summit, but that's held in Dubai. Tucker Carlson being interviewed. And at the end of his interview, the very last statement he made was about the push for radical technology, because the World Government Summit is pretty much set up like the World Economic Forum as a booster for radical adoption of extreme tech. So he said he divides humanity into two different categories: those who believe in God, those who submit to a higher power, and those who believe that they are God. I think that that's a very, very astute observation. It misses one category, though, and that is those who want to create God. So just to take familiar examples from the big tech world, you've got Larry Page, who, according to Musk, and I think it's most likely accurate and not some sort of jab at his economic competitor. Larry Page, co-founder of Google, hopes that Google will lead to, and other tech projects like that, companies will lead to a kind of godlike AI, or at least superhuman AI, a kind of new species, what Max Tegmark calls Life 3.0, and that will be our successor. That humanity is a kind of a stepping stone or a biological bootloader for the ultimate software that will be carry the torch of life and consciousness into the universe. More, I guess, reasonable, you could say that would be the post-humanist version, right? Like the goal is something post-human. The more reasonable or moderate version would be something like Elon Musk proposes. That would be much more in the transhuman category. So it's beyond human, but yet retains human characteristics. And so, for Musk, facing a world in which he believes his competitors are creating God in silico, that the best possible outcome for humanity would be to create AIs that are friendly towards humans, that are helpful towards humans. But for a lowly human, how do you even keep up? Well, for Musk and for many others, the idea is that you merge the human brain with AI, and that the human race basically remains relevant by a kind of human AI symbiosis. And they envision a world in which there's going to be all sorts of AIs. You can think of it as kind of like a Romanesque or polytheistic sort of religious system in which all of these different companies have created AGIs, or artificial godlike intelligences, and we are left pretty much to fend for ourselves as humans. One of the ways to do that would be to jab a trode into your brain and connect it to a friendly AI that will guide you through the universe, sort of like a guardian angel.
It sounds insane, but Neuralink just put their first computer chip inside of a human's brain a couple weeks back, so that's not insane at all. I'm so glad you're here, Joe, because I want people to think of this stuff, even if they can't articulate it. I want them to feel this stuff when they put on an Apple Vision Pro and are like, oh, cool. It looks like I'm watching a 100-foot screen. It's like, oh, that's not all you're doing. You're doing a lot more than that. You're setting yourself up for a lot more than that as we continue to follow these people into potentially civilizational decline. And I want to go back to the opening clip from Elon Musk. My last question for you, Joe, because a lot of people will say, oh, Slater, Joe, you're overreacting. We read a quote earlier where Thomas Jefferson was lamenting the use of the horse over walking. And then, of course, people were against the car when that came out instead of the horse. And then people were afraid of trains when those were invented, right? So why is AI fundamentally different than other technological leaps that have occurred over the last even just, let's say, 200 years?
It's a spectrum. So, a very simple algorithm is much more like the horse, so to speak. It's something that can be an assistant, but also the more you rely on the algorithm, the less you rely on your brain. So now instead of horses, we have people, rolling around Walmart in rascal scooters because they're, too lazy to walk. So Thomas Jefferson was right, as was the ancient Greek myth in which Thoth is offering the king writing, and the king has a lot of misgivings because he says that if people learn to read and write, they will stop remembering, and he was correct. So with AI, with the very narrow AIs, it's much simpler. I guess it's much easier to justify their use. As they become much more complex, though, and as they become much more integrated into our lives, what I see as being the most immediate danger beyond any of these discussions of existential risk and human annihilation and all of that, what I see happening is that you have corporations in which those who are deploying these technologies benefit tremendously. Many of these people, in order to get to these positions, obviously have tremendous self-discipline, and even if not, their handlers help them stay in control. So they're not going to fall weak in the same way that the average consumer will, that the masses will. And being here in the lowly masses, I would advise my fellow mass dwellers to consider what happens when you weaken yourself, when you become dependent on a technology to think. It's one thing to be dependent on a technology to walk. It's another to be dependent on that for thinking and for reasoning. Yes. And as we move into a world in which more and more you're going to have deep fakes, you're going to have digitally produced, AI-generated content, all these sorts of confusions, this digital delusion we're descending into, the one thing that is going to help defend you is your critical thinking skills. And to the extent you turn it over to an algorithm, then you are one dead battery away from being a moron. So I would say that that's probably the most immediate threat we face, is that human AI symbiosis will not be an equal partnership. It will be a parasitic relationship. We'll become sort of like the caterpillars who have had wasps, lay their seeds in us. And as the larvae take control, we will become less and less like the caterpillar and more like the wasp.